First, let's end the ridiculous debate over how to pronounce the name of this shoe. It's Cielo, right? Oh, it's not? Cello? Whatever. This is Hoka's newest marathon distance running shoe, and no matter how you pronounce it, it'll feel like you're flying. This shoe makes a bold statement, whether you want to or not. Given its brilliant performance, which I'll get to in just a minute, the appearance is kind of a mashup of different designs. At first glance, the midsole looks like you're about to strap on a couple of futuristic looking flotation devices, but then you look at this knit upper. It doesn't really shout out speed to me. The best way to describe it is corduroy. I guess they're bringing back the 70s. The laces are unique as well, to say the least. From far away, they look kind of cool, but when you touch them, they also feel like a material from the past. Maybe you're too young, but do you remember those Velcro wallets we had back in the 80s? It seems to be made of that same ripstop material, which if anything is extremely durable. Now, if you've done any research on the Cielo X1, you'll know that there are a lot of complaints about these shoelaces. So I tried going into this with an open mind. After a few dozen miles and seeing how the lacing system works, I think the material choice was a practical one. As you can see, instead of the laces passing through a single eyelet, it goes over and under two eyelets before it crosses to the other side. This creates a lot of friction. I think the intent of these double eyelets was to make sure you get a tight lockdown that doesn't go slack no matter how long or hard you run, and that it definitely does. Which means you really have to make sure to dial in the exact pressure you want around your foot because there's no give once it's locked down. I commend Hoka for trying something new, but despite that, I kind of have to agree with everyone out there. These laces suck. Because of the material, the laces are a little tricky to tie. It never feels like you're getting a tight knot. I usually double knot my laces to prevent them from coming loose, yet I noticed at the end of my long runs, they nearly did come untied. But having said that, the double eyelet design still kept the same amount of tension as it did when I started, so I guess that part's a success. I bet we'll see that again in the future. It's really not a deal breaker when you weigh them against how amazing these shoes feel on the run. The rest of the upper is fairly minimal. There isn't much padding around the ankle except a couple of cushioned pillows on either side. The heel counter is pretty flimsy for the most part. I never have a problem with wimpy heel counters, as long as it feels like I'm locked in, which I did. And there were no particular hotspots or irritation anywhere at any time. They were a little bit warm though. Let me just point out a couple more things before we get to this meaty midsole right here. The tongue is gusseted, which is nice, but just remember though, it's a little off-center. I keep thinking my feet were crooked every time I put these shoes on. I angle my arms out to the side to make sure I can get an even tautness. Speaking of getting into these shoes, it's not that easy. The tongue is fairly thin, elastic, and there's too much of it. Maybe it's not a problem if you have a wider foot, but I couldn't keep the tongue from bunching up each time I wore these, but it probably would have felt a tad more comfortable if it didn't. Overall, it looks like two design teams worked on this shoe, one for the upper and one for the midsole. Then they mashed it up and birthed this. Despite how this looks in real life, it's a pretty photogenic shoe, I must say. Alright, let's talk about the fit. This is the first Hoka shoe that I think fits true to size, mostly. I have the Clifton 9 in the same size 8.5. They fit a little snug. I also ran the Rocket X2. That I had to size up because my toes were hitting the front. Now the Cielo X1, lengthwise, I think it's perfect. But there's a ton of room in the toe box. I think it's too much fabric. My feet are a tad on the narrow side and it makes it look really baggy. In the end, considering it's meant for the marathon distance, I think it's probably better to have a little more room than not. My feet tend to swell over the longer distances, which I think is kind of normal, so I won't complain about the extra room. Okay, now for the part that I'm most excited to talk about, the performance. It's incredible. This maximal yet legal stack of dual density Pibofoam is gnarly. You have a slightly softer density foam on top of a winged carbon fiber plate compared to what's underneath it. It's such a lively, high stack of foam, 39 millimeters in the heel and 32 millimeters in the forefoot, that I think they needed a winged plate to help minimize the roll. Otherwise, you're spilling potential energy off to the sides instead of using it to push you forward. Initially, it does feel wobbly just standing there, like you're on top of a couple of miniature balance balls. It takes a little bit of getting used to. Of course, this shoe isn't meant for standing around, but even stretching and walking is a little difficult at first. I was worried I sprained my ankle just getting to the start of my run. But once you get moving, it shoots you out like a slingshot. My first outing on these was an easy run, and oh my god, there's so much bounce to this shoe, it's laughable. You know when you were a kid, and as a joke, your friend would kick the soles of your shoes from behind while you were walking, and it made your feet pop up like that? It feels silly, I know, but it's like that. The amount of energy return and propulsion you get from every step is ridiculous. This shoe is like a young thoroughbred. It just wants to run. So throw out your watch or just turn it off, forget about all your paces, and start running the feel. And that feeling is gonna be like you're flying. You're in for a memorable ride. It makes every pace feel not just effortless, but fun. I really don't think I've ever had that experience to this degree. One other interesting thing to note about the midsole is the shape. From the lateral side, it looks like it's been decoupled, but when you flip it over, you can see that on the medial side, it's one continuous piece of foam, minus a couple of the large cutouts to save weight. I found that interesting because some companies like to cut out the midsole on the medial side, where the arch is. I actually think this is a better design. Most people naturally pronate a little bit, so it's better to cut out the foam on the opposite side, because if you lose support under the arch, it could cause some other foot problems. So all that combined with the aggressive rocker geometry that Hoka is known for really makes every stride invigorating. I didn't really think that it would work at an easy pace. The bounce felt enjoyable but awkward. Yet after just a few miles, I noticed that it's actually quite forgiving. Once you start flowing with a new energized rhythm, it's a joy to run at any pace. It even makes speed sessions fun. I know, not an easy feat. And the added benefit of it being unstable to walk in is that it motivates me to do jog recoveries in between my intervals instead of slowing down to a walk. If a shoe can motivate me to do that, something definitely right is going on in here. This shoe wants to keep going even when you think you're done. All that sounds great, but without good traction, all this foam is really good for nothing, right? Considering this is a race day shoe, there's a lot of rubber guarding this precious foam. Maybe that's what they were thinking too. I've used these on several runs of all different types so far, even on the track. They grip well and seem durable so far. In any case, I plan to use these sparingly because they are kind of expensive. Yeah, that's the only real drawback I can think of. But a case could be made that if you buy these, you really don't need any other super shoe. The Cielo X1 is like driving in a race car with the top down. You can cruise along or open up the throttle and all you'll feel is the wind passing over your ears. And that's exactly what I'm looking for in a marathon shoe. Why? Because I just signed up for my first marathon ever. I'm taking the plunge at the Rock and Roll Marathon Series in San Diego this June. I'm so excited and freaking out already. I'll keep you posted on how the training goes. I know you guys have a ton of tips for a newbie like me, so let me know your best, or preferably your most curious ones down in the comments below. Needless to say, that's the reason I ended up buying the Cielo X1. I'm looking for the best option for my first marathon experience. I do have a couple other super shoes to test, and they look promising, but you never forget your first, do you? Right or run, let's get it done.